Alright, so what we're going to be talking about a lot today is going to be about color. And what I thought I would start out with is like on the first day, I may have mentioned about Pantone colors. Now, Pantone colors are basically where you have this universal coloring system where a individual needs to have a certain color or a certain identity, or basically a business has like an identity, and that color needs to be a specific color. And I brought up the idea of Dow, where Dow has a certain red for their logo, and that's what we're going to be talking about a few times today. All right, so what I have here again is a site called Pantone. Pantone is where you have this universal coloring system. I will be talking about this a lot when we get to in the Illustrator, show you how to access that. But what it is like a pre-made color. You go into like Lowe's or Sherwin-Williams or whatever, and you want to paint your wall. You would go into an area and you would pick a certain color, has a number. Same thing applies for print. All right, so what you're dealing with is certain colors that are pre-mixed and used in the printing process. And that's what we have here. Pantone.com is the actual site for this. As you can see, they have like swatch books that are pretty much just like going into like Sherwin-Williams or Lowe's or wherever to get a certain color paint. All right, so what we're also dealing with too is we're going to be dealing with a few things like what I said, like CMYK. CMYK is what we have as far as like a color printing source. When you are printing color on your desktop printer, you're dealing with what is called like CMYK, because you would go and get ink. One of them must be a black cartridge. The other one would be a tri-color cartridge. And that's what we're dealing with here, is that we have the three colors: cyan, magenta, yellow. So you got cyan, magenta, yellow. But what happens is when it overlaps each other, it can form a black. And when you add black into it, it adds more of a rich black when you have all four colors put in together. There is a difference between black ink and a CMYK black. That's more rich, it's more filled in, it's all that stuff. All right, so each picture is like when you see a picture that's put together, you may see it look a lot like this when you magnify in, because what it does is like all three or all four of those colors overlay, they create an image, or may result in different colors. So you can kind of see that this is an example. Same thing here is that you can kind of see what each of these do to create this particular image. All right. So that is CMYK. That is a print process. Anything that has ink put on paper is considered a CMYK print. All right, so what is RGB? RGB research basically is where you got light. In the old times, in the old days, when they had big screen TVs at people's houses, they would have what is called a big screen TV, and usually at the very bottom, the base would be really big, and they would have three lights in the bottom. Three light bulbs. One is red, one is green, one is blue. And when all three of those lights got together, they actually did the opposite of what CMYK does. RGB, when you put all of them together, they form white. Alright, so because what we're dealing with is light. Red, green, blue light put together form a white color. So when would you ever use this? Well, RGB is when you would actually use it as any kind of digital format. Anything that is projecting light on something is referred to as RGB. Your computer monitors, your phones, your TVs, all that stuff is basically projecting RGB. red, green, blue. All right. So we wouldn't use RGB for anything that is printed because it just would not print well when it doesn't have the same properties that are going on. All right. So hopefully that gives you an idea about what color is. So I'm going to jump over to Illustrator now. All right, and we're going to talk about a lot more with as far as color goes. So I'm going to go over to one of my shape tools, and I'm just going to basically put down a box. It doesn't matter what it is. And over here you got the fill and you got the stroke. If you double click on the fill, you got this, which we should remember from our first lecture, basically dealing with different colors within that area. And again, there are two different areas on a shape. There's a fill, which is the inside color, and then there's a stroke, which is the outside border of any shape. Those are both represented here. So I'm going to choose like a red, and when I choose red here, you can see that there are different formulas. Here's the red, green, blue, which is red is 235 or 34, and then there's 21 and 21 for green and blue as well. Those three numbers, the highest you can go in those particular numbers is 255. So it could be 255 red, 255 green, 255 blue, which would actually make it more of a white color. So you'd see here is like if I go to white. CMYK is also represented. Cyan is 7% cyan, 97% magenta, 97% yellow, and 1% black. Again, that is the percentage of ink that is being put on the paper for that. That is vital information. Now, if you're going to web development, you're going to want to know what is called a hexadecimal number. The hexadecimal number is represented by 6 characters. And you can see that here. This red is represented in hexadecimal as DD2A2A. Right? Those particular, each 2 digits represent a different formula, much like red, green, blue, except those 2 digits deal with different colors. All right. So we can deal with like reds. We can use this area to kind of like bring up to blues, to teals, to green, to yellows, whatever you want. Okay, so you could choose whatever colors you want, and I'll choose more of a blue. So I'll hit OK. All right, and that applies that particular color there. Okay. Other areas where you can actually deal with color is going to be over here in the color palette. The color palette has that same thing, fill and stroke. If I choose stroke, that's in the front, and that represents there. If I go to the fill, that's also represented by sliders in here. All right. Now I can move these sliders around if I want to get a little bit more detailed as far as what kind of colors I want. And they're represented by what that color is going to be in that particular slider if I move it. You also have a spectrum here. So it's like if you want to use, if your cursor goes into it, you got an eyedropper, which allows you to choose any color you want in here. All right. So that is fill for down there. Now if I go halfway down, you're going to see that there may be an option called fill in the appearance. If you choose fill, again, you can click on that and you might get what is called swatches. These are pre-made swatches that Adobe just put in that you can utilize. The next one, if you go up here, there are 2 buttons. One is called swatches, one is called the color mixer, which is the same thing as what the color palette is, except it's done here on the fly. So I can change these here as I go, right there, and just click off of it and it will go away. All right, strokes can be done the same way. You can go over here, double click it, get that. You can make sure that the stroke is in front. You can adjust the sliders. You can choose any color in here and it will affect the stroke. You can go down here and you double click on that or click on it, basically to choose any color you want. But there's also something here too. that I just want to point out. You've got the stroke here, but then there is a how big is that stroke. So if I increase this, you see that the stroke is getting a little bit bigger, or if I do down, the stroke is getting a little bit smaller. Now you can also click on stroke, and that brings up palette. That palette gives you a weight. Also the cap. Cap as far as like how round it is. Now cap is only used if you have a non-closed line. It does not work if you have an actual shape like we have here. It has a box there, doesn't have an end to it. It just continues around. The corner, however, it does. If you choose the second one, you got a rounded corner. If you go here, you got a beveled corner. You can also align the stroke. So right near by default, the stroke is in the middle. So like if I choose the align stroke to the inside, you'll see that the stroke goes on the inside of that line. If you choose the second one, it goes on the outside of that line. So depending on what you were looking for, you can choose any one of those options. You can also choose a dashed line if you want. If you want to include a dash, right now by default, set to 12 points. And make it 4. And that gives me an even 4 for the dash, 4 for the space. 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. But there is a dash gap, which has different options here. If I, let's say, want the gap to be 12, you can see that I can space out the dashes 4 points. The gap between dashes is 12 points. So I can do it that way. So you can play around with the stroke option if you want. Alright, so what we're going to deal with here, again, too, is I wanted to delete that. I'm going to bring out another box. Oh, I should probably turn off dashes for that. Because the last form of, last shape and color and all that characteristics gets carried over. So, when I talked about color, I had 3 things. There was a Pantone, CMYK, RGB. And right now we deal with CMYK. Right now it's in CMYK. Alright. And we can deal with RGB as well. But one of the things that you want to deal with is if you had to do a logo and you had to create a Pantone color system. Most logos have to be done in a I would recommend that if you create a logo, define the colors as Pantone first. Then you can deal with CMYK RGB. Mostly because if you're sometimes they print a logo, they don't want to add the extra expense of doing a 2-color. You can basically change that to whatever. But if some cases where you have to choose colors like silk screening, or maybe you do a 2-color print or vinyl or whatever, you want to make sure you're choosing some kind of like Pantone color to define so that they can get as close to that Pantone color as possible. Alright, so what I'm going to do is, where do you find Pantone colors? That's the thing. You go up to Window, and you go to where it says Swatch Libraries at the bottom of Window. You're going to see that there is an option called Color Books, and in Color Books refers to all of the universal coloring systems in the entire world. Alright, some of these color systems do not refer to American, but Pantone does. So we usually use Pantone for anything. Now, if you scroll down, you see a lot of Pantone elements, but what we concentrate on is where it says solid coated or solid uncoated. Now, what's the difference? They have the same numbers for the color, but they don't actually look they don't look the same. And why is that? When they print, the color ink may look different. Okay, so it may look different, the color ink is the same. Go back. The color ink is the same. However, whatever they're printing on, whatever they're using to print it on. Maybe a coated sheet, which tends to be a little bit more glossy, semi-gloss, of a texture onto the paper, will show brighter than what is called an uncoated, where basically the colors tend to mute or subdue into the paper, or sink in, so it kind of like the paper kind of soaks it up, and we're left with a kind of more of a dull version of that color. So they're on here, and basically you can define them as that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose solid coated, and that brings up another palette. And as you can see, there are a lot of colors in here. So what I like to do, a lot of times when I do this, or you may actually see it like this. You may see it like that when you first pop this up. I think this is set by default. Mine has not been in default. All right, so here you got all these different colors. If you roll over them, then you got your number. Well, let's say you're using what is called Pantone 300. 300 is the brightest blue, but it is not translatable to CMYK. So if I want it to be 300, you can see that here. The first one's 300, the other one is 3005. Well, if I want it to be 300, you'll see I have it like that. The computer system does not relay it to as well at showing it as well as what could be on a swatch. Swatch we're going to show a lot brighter. This is a lot duller. So we have that. So you can put it in the search. However, a lot of times what I do is I choose what is called small list view, and that will allow me to kind of like pan through all the colors sorted in their particular color scheme. So you can kind of see, I can go down to 385, kind of like a dirty green, or brown here, or grays, or anything that's within this area. You can choose and define those as Pantone colors. So we go to yellow for that. All right. Now, Adobe does allow have some options in here. If you go to Window, go to Swatch Libraries, you have all these different options. When you say Swatch Libraries, which means that these are all defined as what Adobe thought those colors represented those things. Like foods. If we go to Foods and Beverages, these are the colors that they thought looked good for food. All right, so you got maybe an apple red or something like that, or an orange color. All right, so you have those options. You do have other options as well. So like our history, you're going to go for the Baroque period. Here are a lot of the colors that Adobe thought represented that period. So it has some defined swatches in there that you can utilize if you need to. All right. Okay. So I don't think I'm going to talk too much about anything other than here. There's one final thing that I do want to talk to you about. All right. One of the things is like we deal with what is called gradients, which there are a couple ways of putting in what is called gradient. A gradient is one color going to another color. So one of the ways is if you go up to Window, and if you go to Gradient, you can bring that up. Okay, Gradient, there. And in here it shows you that there are some pre-made gradient elements. But there are about 3 types here now. One is called a linear gradient, which goes from point A to point B. The other was a radial gradient, or there's also now a new freeform gradient. All right, I'm just going to show you the basics here. So like once I choose linear gradient, all right, I have this, was applied this black and white. Down below, you're going to see like this kind of like a slider in a way. There's a diamond at the front or at the top, and there are 2 points here that actually represent each of the colors. The diamond represents the actual middle point where these 2 colors meet or mix 50-50, 50% and 50%. So like if I wanted to change this to go from a blue to a black, all you have to do is like double click it and it'll bring up this. So if I choose blue, I can do that. You can also go to the color slider and adjust it if you need to. Okay. And then you can do the same thing over here, but what if you want to add blue, red to black? All right, you want to add another color in here. If you move your cursor just below it, you'll see that the cursor turns into an arrow with a plus sign next to it. If you click it, it'll add another color. If you double click it, then it allows you to choose your color to do that. You can add in as many as you want throughout as whatever fits in here throughout this particular process. But for here, we add in a bunch of colors. We define it. Go here. Great. Let's go orange more. Or actually, let's go more pink. Okay, there we go. All right, so we got that. Now, what if you wanted to take one out? All right, you can select it. You can hit the little trash can. However, you can do it a little bit easier. You can click, hold, drag down, and it will come off anyways. So you can pull these off, and then you can adjust if you need be, like that. All right, you see it's affecting this as well. Now, there is also another way of doing that, or another way of adjusting. So it's like if you have, like, let's say you wanted this to go, didn't want it to go straight across, you wanted to kind of go in this direction. All right, you can change the angle if you want. So like 90%, 45%. I don't usually like doing that. I like to actually go up to where it's at, we're into a tool called the gradient tool. So like if I use the gradient tool, you'll see that this pops up. Now at any point here, I could go out here and just click, hold, drag. And I can put it at any angle I want. But you can also go in here in this line and you'll see that there's those colors. You can adjust them. You can adjust the middle points. You can slide these things down as much as you possibly want to. It's totally up to you in creating that particular element. Now you could go out here, and let's see, well, go out this way, and you can click hold drag and create, just basically freeform your angle from there if you want. All right. So you can adjust that. Now another thing, I'm going to delete that here. I'm going to add like a solid color to that, and I'm going to turn the stroke off for a second. I want to define this as a blue. So I'm going to draw another square. All right, so I've got a blue square, and I want to add a little bit more control as to what kind of gradient is there, or how it forms. Right now you can do it as a straight line to line, or you can actually come out as radial. I would suggest playing around with them. Oh my gosh, you guys are boring. Just kidding. All right, so what I want to deal with is what is called a mesh. All right, this is where you can actually get some really defined options. So if I go to my gradient tool, and there's an option called mesh. All right, so if I'm going to select this, go to my mesh, and I come out here and I just click. All right, what I just did was I put in a point inside the shape. Now, what does this have to do with gradients? Well, with this, what I can do is each point I can represent to be a different color. So right now, since I have no other predefined colors other than this blue, right now, since that one point is selected, I can come up to my color palette and I can change this. And as you can see, that point gradiates from this point to that point, to this 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 point. Okay. If I come over here, I can see I'm adding in another one. I can make a lighter one here, And as you can see, it gives me a little bit more definition. All right, I can add another point here, bring this down. Once they get closer, they become a little bit more defined as they get closer to something. So you can look like you are creating like a squeezed effect here. Now, a lot of times what you have is certain points. What you can do is you can select them, hit the delete key, and it'll basically take that out. So here, we'll go ahead and define this a little bit. And you can, each point you can define like as a different color here. So like if you move your cursor over a line, hold down the Alt key, you can click on a point or click on a line and you can take that out. Or just click somewhere without holding on the key and you can add in. And do whatever you want. This is where a lot of artists will use Illustrator to make some really photographic portraits within Illustrator. As a definition, I know that there's a bunch of them out there. That you can create photorealistic things within Illustrator. So like here, as you can see, if just as an option, all right, here's an option right there. So like here, it's create Ian McKellen as a photorealistic. Or here, you can kind of see the difference. Here's, I forget his name, Christian Bale. And you can see the wireframe for it all. All right, a lot of these times they actually use this gradient mesh to actually create that look. So you can kind of see here how that gradient mesh is being used to create that type of look for it. All right, guys, so I think that's about it. I'm going to talk about color here. I talked about a little bit about color. So I'm going to kind of leave it as is. And then I'll be posting the next exercise, how to do the next exercise, here shortly. All right. So have a good rest of your day.